Hey, what's up, guys? I'm here to review season 2 of the Clone Wars, so let's get right to it. Right off the back, I just want to say that this show has shown such immense improvement in contrast to season 1. Now, I gave season 1 a C+. It had tremendous issues, especially in the comedy department. The comedy in season 1 wasn't comedy to me. It was straight up cringeworthy, awful toddler humor, and I'm talking specifically about the droid humor, which really dragged down the whole show. And I thought that if that kind of humor wasn't in season 1, it would have been a B+ immensely. Now, speaking about season 2 is outstanding. Season 2 is an A+. Right off the back, the droid humor has been reduced significantly, as it should have been. It should have been done sparingly, even though I still don't like it. In season 2, it's nowhere near as crammed down your throat as it was in season 1. So I think that they listened to complaints about that and kind of developed the show to be a little bit more mature. Now, like I said, right off the bat, this show, season 2, is amazing. The first story arc, which is called Holocron Heist, involves Ahsoka, being overconfident. And due to her overconfidence, she's being punished by the Jedi Council and has been put on library duty. And at the same time, Cad Bane, the ruthless bounty hunter from the last story in season 1, has been hired by Darth Sidious to retrieve a holocron that contains the name of all the Jedi. All the Force-sensitive children in the galaxy. So Cad Bane sneaks in and he teams up with a character that's of the same species as the one from Attack of the Clones. I believe her name was, what was her name again? Zem Whistle or something like that. Yes, the shapeshifter. So he teams up with her and she tries to infiltrate the Jedi archives, and Ahsoka discovers what's going on, but by then it is too late. Cad Bane got the holocron himself, even though his little partner got caught. And Ahsoka is not as annoying as she was in the beginning of season 1, and she's a great character. I'm starting to really like her at this point. In the next part of this story arc, you have the brutal death of the Holocron Keeper, which was very, very, very shocking, especially for something that is initially intended to be a kid's show. The way that this character dies, he literally is just tortured to death in the most cold-hearted and brutal manner, with Cad Bane overseeing his torture, and he's just indicating to the droids, push harder, push him harder, push him harder. And even the droids are like, this may kill him. And Cad Bane was like, I don't give a shit, and that's exactly what happens. And the Holocron Keeper is murdered, and then Anakin and Ahsoka are trying to retrieve the holocron from Cad Bane, and he needed a Jedi. He needed the Holocron Keeper to open the holocron, because he can't do it himself. So he devises a plan in which he knew that Anakin, Ahsoka, or some other Jedi would come by and he could capture them. So essentially he knew that the Jedi would come to him, that he wouldn't need to seek out a Jedi in order to open the holocron. And that's exactly what happens, and we have an outstanding little action scene there where they deactivate the gravity, and you see this kind of like a battle between the Jedi and the Separatists in the bunker, or not a bunker, but like a hangar bay, and there's no gravity, and it just it was nice. It was a nice, a nice action sequence, to see how Jedi would fend themselves in that environment, an anti-gravity environment. And, Cad Bane has a little showdown with Ahsoka, and he uses his wits to take advantage of her. And I really like Cad Bane. He's an amazing villain. Amazing, outstanding. One of the best Star Wars villains. I would have loved to see a character like him in the live action films. Now, moving on. So the first two parts of this Holocron Heist arc, I love. I thought they were outstanding. I thought they were perfect. Now, the last arc it's not so good in my opinion. I mean, it's not terribly bad. Basically Anakin opens the holocron reluctantly, but he did so because Ahsoka was held at ransom. So he opened it, and Cad Bane got away. So again, now we have Mace Windu, Obi-Wan, and Anakin pursuing Cad Bane in order to save the children. One thing that really kind of gets to me about this episode is when it depicts the Jedi children. These are babies, literally. These are infants. And it shows one infant child, a Rodian child, moving kind of like blocks, building blocks with his mind. And I kind of felt like that undermines the whole notion of training. Like, here we have an infant, a toddler that has never even been trained, and they can already move things with their minds, and they're only like a matter of months old. Maybe that's nitpicking, but I still feel like, it's I feel like it's pushing it too much. I don't like the Force to get abused, because then it destroys the magic of it. So that was one thing I didn't like about this episode. Now, one thing I did like about the episode is when the Jedi team up to mind rape Cad Bane in order to find out the whereabouts of, the stolen Jedi children. That was very controversial as far as ethics. Is it ethical to do that? They got, but this is time-sensitive stuff. They got to rescue these kids. So, again, it's just illustrating the moral ambiguity that comes about during times of war. So the third part in this Holocron Heist arc is the weakest one. However, overall, great story, great characters, and great action. Now, moving on, the next episode is Senate Spy. And I enjoyed this episode. This is another episode where things felt a little bit more Star Trek-y rather than Star Wars, because it deals with political espionage and political intrigue and Padme. So essentially, Padme reunites with a former boyfriend who is suspected of being a separatist sympathizer. And there's a little bit of tension between Anakin and Padme because she's encouraged by the Republic and also by the Jedi to kind of exaggerate her affections for him in order to for him to leak information. So that was interesting. It was a very adult episode. Had a lot of good drama, and it was very like I said, it felt very Star Trek-ish. Rather than Star Wars, but I don't mind that. I really want something mature. I think Star Wars has been dwelling a little bit too much in the, baby humor kind of mentality, and that it's nice to have something refreshing like this story arc. So yeah, basically, Senator Clovis turns out to be a separatist sympathizer, and he tries to poison Padme. Or no, he doesn't poison Padme, but Padme gets poisoned by, some guys from the Trade Federation. And then this, Clovis, even though he's a sympathizer for the separatists, he's not entirely evil. I mean, he cares about Padme. He didn't want to hurt her. He didn't want her to die, what had to happen was Anakin had to come in and save the day, through his cleverness and through his wit. Now, moving on, the next episode, which I thought was absolutely spectacular. It was amazing. One of the best episodes in the entire series was the Geonosis campaign, and specifically the episode Landing at Point Rain. I mean, it was spectacular, that opening sequence. I mean, it was like Saving Private Ryan done Star Wars style. I mean, just the way, I mean, and it's nice to get away from the stupid droids and to focus on, like, you know, instead here we got giant termite bugs, you know, but that's cool because I feel a little bit more tension in there because these are living, breathing beings. You know what I mean? Rather than just stupid droids, you know, I felt like they were more of a threat. And even though I know Anakin's not going to die, Obi-Wan's not going to die, it still felt very intense. It was a super intense, I mean, spectacularly well-directed action sequence. I mean, the whole landing, the way that they captured the lethality of war, you know, I mean, people are dropping. Jedi are dropping left and right, you know, clones are, you know, ships exploding. I mean, it was, like I said, it was like Saving Private Ryan landing on, you know what I'm saying, on the beaches of Normandy. I mean, it was great action sequence, super intense. I mean, the next episode in the story arc, I mean, I believe this is a 4-episode story arc, the Geonosis campaign. The weapon factory sequence, we have to have, so basically Anakin teams up with Jedi Master Luminara and her Padawan. So you have her Padawan, which is Barriss, or Baron Coffee or something like that. I don't know. And so Baron or Baroness, I can't remember exactly her name, she teams up with Ahsoka and they have to infiltrate a weapons factory. You know, when they succeed in their mission, but there's this segment in the episode where you're not sure if Ahsoka and Barriss survived. You know, and there's a very interesting exchange that happens between Anakin and Luminara and it kind of foreshadows all of Anakin's problems with not being able to let go and his attachment, and they speculate on the death of their Padawans, and Anakin refuses to accept it. He refuses to accept it, and he kind of down talks Luminara. I mean, and it foreshadows the entire conflict that Anakin is going to have to face because he is too attached and that he's unable to let go. Yet, at the same time, I empathize with Anakin. I mean, I feel like the passivity that Luminara shows in this, I mean, if that had been me, I would have been like, shut the fuck up. I'm going to go see if my student is alive. I ain't trying to sit here and sit on some rock and close my eyes and pray and hope that they're okay. I'm going to go in there and I'm going to check and I'm going to move stuff with the Force and I'm going to get her. You know, so I'm able to empathize with Anakin, you know, and you know, and even though I know that the Jedi way is the way to the light, you know, some of their teachings, you know, can be very infuriating, you know, even to somebody that believes in them. You know, so this is something that's present in, I believe, in every religion. You know, it's easier said than done, man. So I love that little exchange between Luminara and Anakin. So again, then the next following episode in this Geonosis story arc, we're introduced to the Geonosis Queen. So she's literally like the queen of all those giant termite bugs. And that was a great episode. Again, this whole arc, this whole Geonosis campaign is outstanding. So basically Luminara gets kidnapped or held captive by the Geonosians, and Anakin and Obi-Wan have to go and retrieve her, and they come across the Queen, and it felt very Aliens like, you know, the Queen. And the Queen basically, you know, is, how dare you come to my planet and make demands of me? And Anakin and Obi-Wan have to rescue Luminara, and they do so. But when they rescue her, they end up coming across zombies. I mean, you know, there's no other word for it. So basically, some dead Geonosians turn out to be zombies, and they're attacking the clones, they're attacking Anakin, they're attacking the Jedi, and basically the queen is able to send her, I guess you want to say her little babies. They look like little worms, and whenever they infect a host, they possess them like zombies. And one of these little worms actually is able to sneak in to the body of a clone, and it eventually spreads to Ahsoka and Luminara's apprentice, Barriss. And that leads us to the next episode in this arc, where it's basically Ahsoka and Barriss, or zombies, they get taken over, and actually, I'm sorry, that correction, just Barriss gets taken over. Ahsoka doesn't get taken over, but it's a very emotional exchange because her and Barriss have bonded, through war. And when they were believed to be dead by Ahsoka and Luminara, they were buried under rubble, and they kind of like grew close to one another during that time. And there's a moment where Ahsoka, it like kind of like you could see that she's dealing with it, like she may have to kill her newfound friend, but she's able to overcome and figures out that the host, the worm, doesn't like the cold, and she's barely able to save Barriss and barely able to save her own life. And again, the whole Geonosis campaign, the whole Geonosis arc was outstanding. I loved it. Totally shits on the Ryloth campaign from season 1. I mean, just the tone of it. The tone of all 4 episodes was serious, and I loved it, and I appreciated it. The animation was great. The action was great. The characterization was great. The emotional resonance that I felt was there. It was present. So now, moving on into the season, we come across the episode Grievous Intrigue. Now, this is kind of a 2-part story arc, and I felt Grievous Intrigue was another awesome episode. And in this episode, we have to rescue, Anakin has to rescue a Jedi from Grievous. There was great action, lots of lightsaber battles and stuff. And it was just a great action-filled episode. I'm glad that the droid humor wasn't completely bonkers and ridiculous in this one. Yeah, so it was just a straight-up great episode. Nothing too intricate in regards to plot. This episode ties into the following episode, where Grievous basically escapes to the planet, and we come across like a story within the story. And in this story, it involves Rex. Is it Rex or Cody? I believe it's Rex. So he's one of the main head honcho clones. Like, he's basically like the leader of the clones. And Rex comes across another clone who is a deserter. A clone that has deserted the Republic forces, and who now has a family. And there's great storytelling here. I mean, it's food for thought, and it makes you think of the moral, or rather immoral, implications of using a clone army. I mean, are these clones entitled to a family? Are they entitled to their own lives? Are they entitled to have an opinion as to why they should be fighting? And really fascinating, great stuff. Unfortunately, this episode has a little bit of corny droid humor in it, but the emotional content and the way that this story can make you think about the clones and really make you feel for them, it more than makes up for it. And again, it's another great, outstanding episode, a mature episode, and I really appreciate it. Now, after this episode, or the story arc involving Grievous, we come across literally probably the only episode in the entire season that I abhorred, and that's Lightsaber Lost. So basically, this episode kind of felt like just childish nonsense to me. Now, granted, it's not a completely awful, terrible, cringeworthy episode, but it just felt kind of like, it felt very Saturday morning cartoonish. And I would only recommend this episode to fans of Ahsoka, fans of the young version of Ahsoka. So basically in this episode, Ahsoka loses her lightsaber, and she has to retrieve it from a bunch of thieves. It's very, very minuscule in its storytelling attempts, and there's really not much to it, and she has to team up with an old Jedi. And there's some comedic, kind of humor involving the old versus the young mentality. And there is a moral to the story that's kind of teaching the young about patience and et cetera, et cetera. Again, in the end, it kind of felt like a dud after, these great story arcs that I just talked about. And again, it's not a completely, entirely awful episode as far as making me cringe, but it's just boring. It's boring, and it kind of felt like childish nonsense. So that's really all I have to say about that episode. Now, moving on, we come to another spectacular story arc here that felt very mature. It's showing that this season, that the attempts of storytelling in this season are light years ahead of season 1 and the Clone Wars movie. So what I'm talking about the Mandalorian arc. And I really like how they conceptualize the Mandalorian environment. I thought the art direction is wonderful. And in fact, the art direction of the entire show is spectacular. I mean, this stuff is just like, art. This show is truly a work of art. Now, we're introduced to we're introduced to the leader of Mandalore, and that's Sabine. And Obi-Wan is sent to investigate kind of like the political climate of Mandalore. There was I believe there was some kind of assassination or terrorist act that involved the Mandalore, and Obi-Wan's there to investigate the political climate. And Sabine is saying Mandalore is not involved, and even though you saw a Mandalorian, that's not part of us. That's a part of a separatist sect, the Death Watch, and we have nothing to do with them. We want nothing to do with the war. And another fascinating thing is that Obi-Wan had a little romance with Sabine prior to being a Jedi, or not prior to being a Jedi, but let's just say in his youth as a Jedi, so that is very, 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 very interesting, and I really appreciate that because it adds a layer of depth to the character of Obi-Wan, who up to this point we know very little about him. We know nothing to anything about his past, about his personal past. I mean, sure, we know he was a Jedi, we know he was trained by Yoda and Qui-Gon, etc., but we get to learn a little bit more about what goes on in his heart and what goes on in his mind. So basically the Death Watch are terrorists, and they want to end the passive rule that Sabine has initiated in the Mandalorian government. And they want to go back to the old days where Mandalorians were known as warriors. And that's the conflict going on. I mean, there was a great, outstanding scene that involved the terrorists. The scene where Obi-Wan is walking with Sabine, and just out of nowhere, a terrorist sets off a bomb, and rather than get captured, he chooses to commit suicide. I mean, that's very heavy stuff, very mature and heavy stuff, and I loved it. It's nice to see this in a Star Wars show, just basically in Star Wars in general, because for the longest time, I felt like we haven't had enough adult-orientated stuff. Granted, the original trilogy and Revenge of the Sith, were more adult-orientated. Attack of the Clones, but for the most part, things have been kind of kiddie, and it's nice to see this kind of subject matter be presented to us. And another thing that I loved about this story arc was the introduction to the great character of Vizsla. Oh man, dude, I like Vizsla better than I like Jango Fett or Boba Fett. Like he is a badass. He is a great character, and I love his motivation. He's basically the leader of Death Watch, and he wants to end Sabine's rule of passivity, and he wants to return to the days of the warriors. And I love the dark saber. When I first saw Vizsla pull out his dark saber and duel with Obi-Wan, and just I love that sound effect that they use for the dark saber. I was like, this is badass. I was like, oh, this is better than the movies, man. I really love it. Now, moving on into the story arc, I really like the sexual and romantic tension that Obi-Wan Kenobi and Sabine keep having. It's at the forefront of each one of these episodes, and it makes way for a lot of great dialogue and a lot of good bickering. In the second part of the story arc, which involves the betrayal of one of the Mandalorian senators against Sabine. So basically, this Mandalorian senator is in alliance with the Separatists. Or I'm sorry, rather he's in alliance with Death Watch. So one of Sabine's entourage, who is a senator of Mandalore, he is in allegiance with the Death Watch, and the Death Watch are in allegiance with Dooku. So Anakin and Obi-Wan find this out, and there's a great scene where Anakin just ruthlessly kills this traitor. And it's during a speech that he's giving to Sabine and Obi-Wan. Just basically, he's egging them on, and he's taunting them, and he's saying, look, you're not going to kill me. You know, Sabine, you're a pacifist, and Obi-Wan, you're a Jedi. You know, and if you kill me, Obi-Wan, you will lose sympathy from Sabine, because she's a pacifist. And he's like, none of you guys are going to kill me. And then boom, Anakin just impales him. And it was just like so ruthless. And again, it makes you empathize with Anakin, because any other person would just be like, get this guy out of here. You know, let's just, bring the solution along and just kill this motherfucker. But, when it makes you resonate with Anakin emotionally, and it makes you empathize with him, because it's a very humanistic choice that he makes. And that's one thing that's very controversial about the Jedi. It's that they discourage emotion. And one thing that I always contemplated was, in essence, is the Jedi philosophy inhumane? Is it inhumane? Because the discouragement of emotion, I mean, isn't that everything that makes us human? So again, these are just some things that cross my mind when I see situations like this. And again, this story arc is wonderful. Really like it. And again, I really like the tension between Obi-Wan and Sabine. And for the third part of this story arc, Sabine comes to Coruscant, and she's very frustrated with the forced, I guess you want to say, the forced intervention that the Republic keeps on imposing upon her planet. So essentially, they're saying, since you can't control the Death Watch, the Republic is going to have to step in, which is something that she abhors entirely, because she wants peace, so she feels if the Republic gets involved, it's almost like she's aligning with the Republic in the war against the Separatists, which is something that she does not want at all. And she's actually set up, and she goes on the run, and she's set up for a murder that is committed against one of her diplomats. And it turns out that it was all a ruse, and she eventually clears her innocence. And again, this whole Mandalorian arc was great. It was a great episode. I love seeing Coruscant. Love the chase scenes between Sabine and Obi-Wan and the Coruscant police. And overall, the Mandalorian arc was just a great story and very adult storytelling, and I really appreciate it. And next up in the season 2 is Senate Murders, which was again another great mature episode. Basically, one of Padme's colleagues is murdered, and they're trying to find out who's behind it. And everybody thinks initially that it's senators that are sympathetic to the separatist sentiments and that appear to be leaning towards the war profiteering mentality. But in the end, it turns out to be one of our own entourage who held some kind of resentment towards this senator over a mistake that he made in his past. And again, this episode was very, very, very adult themed. I liked it. Not too much Star Wars Jedi action. It felt very Star Trek-ish, and I don't mind that. I really appreciate it. Another great episode in a great season. And then moving on, we have another outstanding episode. This one's called Cat and Mouse, and it's basically Anakin trying to outsmart another captain, or I guess you want to say admiral or commander of a starship. And this was some great stuff. It kind of felt Star Trek-ish on some Wrath of Khan versus Captain Kirk stuff, and basically Anakin outsmarts the other guy, and I really liked it, and I really liked the villain. The villain was outstanding. And this was just another great episode that illustrated Anakin's prowess as a fighter and his great mastery in commanding ships and piloting. And it kind of like is a throwback, or I'm sorry, a callback to A New Hope, when Obi-Wan spoke to Luke about his father and how great a pilot he was, and how great a Jedi warrior he was. And that's what this episode shows us. Again, another great episode. And the following episode is called Bounty Hunters. And this episode is dedicated to Akira Kurosawa because it gets its inspiration from the film Seven Samurai, which is a classic. If you haven't seen Akira Kurosawa's Seven Samurai, check it out. It's a masterpiece. It's the inspiration for this episode, and was also the inspiration for the Magnificent Seven Western, the original, not the shitty remake with Denzel Washington and the forced diverse cast. So check that out. And again, this episode is beautiful. Nothing too extravagant. Just a nice little 20-minute summary of Akira Kurosawa's Seven Samurai done Star Wars style. And one thing that I really, really appreciated about season 2 was that basically it was just a tribute and a love letter to classic cinema. You know, you had this, the good, the bad, and this Akira Kurosawa Seven Samurai tribute. You got some tributes to the good, the bad, and the ugly, and classic westerns, especially with the character Cad Bane. You got a tribute to like the old zombie films with the Geonosian zombie episodes. You got a tribute to old classic monster movies like Godzilla, The Blob, King Kong, stuff like that, with the Zillow and with the Zillow Beast story arc, which I really appreciated. I liked it. Not my favorite out of all the episodes in season 2, but it's not bad either, but it's totally is a tribute to like Godzilla and those classic giant monster movies, Attack of the 50-Foot Woman kind of stuff. And I appreciated it. However, in the overarching scheme of things, it's not very essential. But again, it wasn't offensive, it wasn't corny, and it wasn't lame. I really appreciated the episode. And then moving on, we finally come to another great story arc, and it's the last story arc of the season. And this one involves Boba Fett as a young boy, and it introduces my all-time favorite villain out of the Clone Wars. And I speak to you of none other than the awesome villain, Aurra Sing. Aurra Sing is an outstanding villain and voice acted by an amazing voice actress. It's actually the actress that played Goldie in the Sin City films. And man, this villain right here, I love her. I love her ruthlessness. I love the way how she's trying to make Boba Fett tough and get rid of all the remaining compassion that's in him. And yeah. I love this villain, and I love how she's trying to extinguish all the remaining compassion that's still within Boba Fett's heart, because Boba Fett is still reluctant to do what's necessary to truly get revenge against Mace Windu for killing his father, Jango Fett. And Aurra Sing is there trying to instruct him, trying to teach him to be ruthless, trying to teach him to no longer take consideration for whoever's in your way. And I actually like Boba Fett's voice acting in this. I mean, because initially you kind of feel like things may turn out to be a little corny, because we're going to, introduce Boba Fett as a kid. But the way that they did it and the way that they executed it was great. It didn't feel corny. It didn't feel lame. It didn't feel cheesy. I was able to, relate to young Boba and his struggle and his sentiments against the Jedi in order to get revenge for his father, or to avenge his father's death. And Boba Fett, I mean, he has great pilot skills. He has skills that no other young clone has, and that's because he was trained by Jango Fett. And we get a lot of great action, and especially the last part of this story arc. I specifically love the scene where Plo Koon and Ahsoka come to negotiate for the hostages' lives that Aurra Sing and Boba Fett have taken. And just the shootout that happens, I mean, damn, man, it was like a classic Western with laser guns, man, and with blasters, and it was very intense. And basically, in the end, Boba Fett gets arrested by the New Republic, and Aurra Sing is thought to be dead, but we all know that's not true. And again, great episodes for the last arc, which involves Boba Fett and Aurra Sing attempting to get revenge for Mace Windu's death in the Attack of the Clone Wars film. My favorite thing about this arc was Aurra Sing. Badass, amazing villain, great Star Wars character. So to wrap it up, Season 2 is outstanding. Season 2 is essential if you're a Star Wars fan. Season 2 is an immense improvement over Season 1, which I gave a C+, and immense improvement over the Clone Wars movie, which was a piece of shit, F-. Season 2 is in a league of its own. So if you're going to recommend this show, I would recommend everyone to start at Season 2, because that's one of the things that I said initially about Season 1. Season 1 had great episodes, but also had a lot of corny, lame stuff, and you kind of felt like, I don't know if I can recommend this to people. It might be embarrassing, especially when they pop in Season 1 and the first episode is the ambush, the one involving Yoda and the stupid droids. But if you tell them Season 2, start with Season 2, you're going to feel good, man, because Season 2 got balls. Season 2 got mature themes. Season 2 is amazing. Can't say anything else. I can't speak any higher of it. It's a great season. Huge improvement over the original. A+. All right? Stay tuned for Season 3 review.